Bills, Ravens, winner goes to the AFC Championship game. We're going to get ready for it today on the Locked On Podcast Network.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into this crossover Thursday of Locked On Bills and Locked On Ravens. We are both proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and we're thankful for our everydayers, those of you who make us your first listen every day and never miss a single episode. Crossover Thursday is presented by Prize Picks. Download the app, use code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. I'm Joe Marino, host of Locked On Bills, joined by Kevin Ostreicher, the host of Locked On Ravens, and we are here to get you ready for this divisional round matchup between the Bills and Ravens. Unless you're living under a rock, you know what's at stake on Sunday night. We're here to give you the path to victory for both teams. We're going to talk Bills storylines, but I do want to start with the Ravens storylines. And Kevin, welcome in. Let's get right into it. A lot has changed for both of these teams since the Ravens destroyed the Bills back in week 4. From the Baltimore side of things, what are the most notable differences in this Ravens team now compared to then?
There are a few, but I think you have to start on the defensive side of the ball, where the Ravens defense, up until that second Cincinnati game on Thursday Night Football, they were bottom 5 in almost every single passing category you could imagine on the defensive side of the ball. Rushing defense, they were great. They were number 1, and that wasn't the issue, but they were having miscommunications and breakdowns on the defensive side of the ball, players not performing up to expectation. And so after that second Cincinnati game, they won that game. They shouldn't have, but they did. They had a closed door, open forum meeting, players, coaches, kind of a soundboard to get ideas off of one another to say, how can we turn this thing around? Because they knew, and everybody knew, they could not win a Super Bowl or even compete for a Super Bowl if the pass defense was going to stay the way that they were. So they made multiple personnel changes. Eddie Jackson, Marcus Williams, they are now not even in the rotation or just off the team. They've placed Darius Washington, a undrafted player a couple years ago out of TCU, who fell out of the draft due to size concerns, but I loved him as a player at the time, and he certainly has taken advantage of his opportunity. They've also moved Kyle Hamilton. He's obviously been known as that free-flowing safety. He can play up at the line, play at all levels of the defense. They've moved him into more of a traditional role next to Darius Washington, and that has helped everybody, including Roquan Smith, who said that he, when Kyle Hamilton was moving around, had to communicate to all 3 levels of the defense, had to keep track of so many different things. With Hamilton being back there, he can be more the communicator in the secondary, which has helped free up some of Roquan Smith's responsibilities. And Roquan had a tough start to the season, but he has looked so much better over the course of the last couple of months of the year. So Baltimore, especially when you talk about even their offensive line, which I know when these two teams faced off in week 4, Baltimore is still trying to figure out their offensive line. It had some rough patches. And at that time, I think people forget that Baltimore was a 1-2 football team, and those 2 losses came because for a couple of reasons, but their offensive line was really not great, but they have found something there. Buffalo was 3-0. They had a great start to the season, and there's really, the Ravens couldn't afford to drop to 1-3, and the Bills obviously had a little bit more room for leeway. So I'm excited to see these two teams face off again, because obviously, sure, you can take away player indicators in week 4 and certain tendencies, but as you mentioned, these are 2 completely different teams, and I'm not putting too much stock into the final score that happened all those months ago.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's so much different on both sides of the equation. I'm glad you called out Darius Washington, man. I loved him at TCU. Just a great football player and just small, right? But get him on the field, he can play. I thought he's been a big-time answer next to Kyle Hamilton. And, man, every time I watch Baltimore, that guy's making plays. So it's probably a big move to step away from, like, established veterans in Marcus Williams and Eddie Jackson. But, like, credit to Zach Orr and company for making that move. And obviously it's certainly the right move for Baltimore. Kevin, the Baltimore Ravens offense is a wagon. It's not hard to understand why it's so good. Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, several good offensive linemen. Tyler Linderbaum's evolved into like a top 3 center in the NFL. Yeah. Boy, was he fun to watch. Back, I really started to appreciate him watching the All-22 coming out of the Bills-Ravens game. I'm like, man, this guy can really ball. So if the Bills' defense is going to have any chance to kind of limit Baltimore's offense, I don't think you're going to stop them. Nobody's stopping this team. How do you limit them? What are the key elements that must be true for Buffalo that you've seen maybe give Baltimore some challenges when that offense isn't pouring it on?
I think creating quick pressure and quick wins on the defensive front, I think has been, and that's obviously in a lot of different situations, teams benefit from that. But I just think the more you give Baltimore time to either let plays develop or, in Derrick Henry's example, let him get downhill, the more scary it becomes for your defense. So I think some of the success that defenses have had against Baltimore this season have come in very quick wins up front that have resulted in Derrick Henry getting hit behind the line or Lamar Jackson having to face quicker pressure than usual. And for Baltimore, we obviously at the time of this recording don't know the status of Zay Flowers yet. I'm sure that's something we'll get to as the show goes on. But if Zay is not able to play in this game, it's going to be a lot on Rashad Bateman and those tight ends to be able to create and win against these Buffalo corners and the Buffalo secondary. And one of the things Lamar Jackson he's been a lot better after the bye week, but one of the things he struggled with early was not being able to make the decision sometimes between picking a rushing lane and when to run through that lane and when to let the routes develop, have receivers work back to him. And I think one of the things is with all quarterbacks, if you speed up that internal clock, and every quarterback's better at it or worse at it, different at it, it can help a defense and force a quarterback into bad decisions. Now, Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen this season have been two very low mistake players overall. Right. And I think that that's going to be a big storyline. Which team can maybe force the opposing offense into a back-breaking turnover? Maybe which team has the ball last year, is able to create that momentum play. But if you win quick up front defensively, that to me is probably Buffalo's best shot. But if you're talking about limiting or stopping, Joe, I think the best thing for both these teams to do is just keep your opposing quarterback off the field. I mean, Buffalo held the ball for 41 minutes against Denver. Baltimore held the ball for 40 minutes against the Steelers. Yeah. If we're talking about just not giving these two great quarterbacks opportunities, keep them on the sideline, keep these two great running backs and Derrick Henry and James Cook on the sideline. That is your best shot at not letting them do damage to you because they literally cannot step on the field in that situation.
Yeah, easier said than done, obviously. And dude, I'm studying Baltimore in anticipation of course, the game and our conversation today. And I'm looking at Lamar Jackson's splits, and it's like, okay, number one in EPA against the blitz, number one in EPA when pressured, number two when not pressured, number four with play action, number one without play action, number one when he gets the ball out in under 2.5, number one when he gets the ball out in over 2.5. It's like, well, what gives? And so I think it's a good call out with the idea of getting quick pressure. And I think generally what that probably does is gives you your best chance to get them out of rhythm, right? I think that's probably the goal. Easier said than done because it seems like they handle everything that's been sent their way. And it's funny, I'm in this position to answer questions of what do the Bills need to do to slow down the Ravens? Like, I don't know. Nobody's figured it out, right? I mean, they run it, they throw it on everybody. So they certainly look like a tough team. And I, to your point, you mentioned like clock control, but I think the best thing that you can do for your defense is probably score, right? Like you just got to score and try to control the game script the best you can, because obviously that got out of hand against Buffalo the first time through. Let me ask you this one here. Generally, both of these teams and quarterbacks are looking for like a big playoff breakthrough. Someone is going to get a big time signature win on Sunday night. And we had this matchup back in 2020. It feels like 100 years ago. Yeah. Divisional round. The Bills were able to win 17-3. They lose to Kansas City in the AFC Championship game. Baltimore got a little taste of that last year. Take us inside like the Baltimore side of things from like the narratives perspective. What does the urgency feel like? What are some of the narratives that maybe Baltimore is looking to break? Because they've been a great football team. Bills have been a great football team. Neither one of these quarterbacks have been to the Super Bowl, and this is like legacy defining stuff against each other. And then what's at stake next week?
Yeah, and I think that's been a big conversation too, is, which team does this game mean more for? Is it more for the Ravens or more for the Bills? It means a lot to both these teams. And I think that actually, Joe, Baltimore and Buffalo are in two decently similar situations, because I know on the Baltimore and Buffalo side of things, if either team loses this game, I'm sure there will be portions of each fan base that maybe says, all right, is this it for McDermott, or is this it for Harbaugh? Or
no, it's not.
What is it's going to be that whole conversation of like, okay, well, the growth isn't there. And like, they need to do this harsh,
they're wasting these great
reset.
Quarterbacks, right?
Right. And those are always conversations. And especially when, again, you haven't made the Super Bowl, as both these teams haven't. They've been to one AFC Championship game each. But I think for Baltimore, the urgency level right now is obviously high. But I think there's a lot more calmness about this team this season, even more so than we saw last year with this Ravens team, at least, where that was the best team in the regular season and they were dominant all regular season, but they didn't have a lot of like signature wins where they had to really work for them. And what I mean by that is they would blow teams up seemingly last year by like 30 every other week. And they had that Rams win when Tylan Wallace had the touchdown down the sideline, and they didn't face a ton of adversity, where this year I think they have. And I think that has helped shape them and mold them. And I think Lamar is at a level of locked in that, much like Josh Allen, that we haven't seen before from him. And, Lamar and Josh, I love how much respect both these guys have for each other, and how every time the Bills and Ravens play, they just go back and forth, throwing compliments at one another and saying how much they appreciate each other's games. Obviously 2018 draft mates, but Lamar's so locked in. He talked about his relationship with Josh and other NFL quarterbacks. And he said before that, he doesn't really hang out with guys in the offseason. And he said, there's no problem with Josh or any of these quarterbacks, but he said, it's like we're competing against each other. I'm trying to beat you, not trying to be your friend. When we're older, we'll probably laugh about it. But right now it's serious. I'm not laughing with you. So obviously these two are competitors. They want to win the game, but they have a lot of mutual respect for each other. And I think that's one of the greatest things that comes out of these Ravens and Bills matchups. But Baltimore knows that the playoff success under Lamar Jackson and John Harbaugh and Lamar Jackson, that pairing has not been up to the level, especially with some of the dominant teams they've had over the years, such as 2019 and 2023. So I know here in Baltimore, a lot of people are hoping that they can kind of buck that trend, but obviously they have a great football team standing in their way in the Buffalo Bills.
All right, we will shift our attention to the Buffalo Bills on the other side of this conversation. Folks, be sure to stick with us. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need to place live bets, to make a same-game parlay, and so much more. And look, FanDuel has a bunch of ways that you can pick up a win. I personally love betting on which players will hit the over on stat projections, and if a team is going to cover the spread, it is thrilling. And not only can you bet on who will win the game, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points each team will score, and so much more. As of the recording of this podcast, the Ravens are 1.5-point favorites going in to Highmark Stadium, with the over-under set at 51.5. You like that? Go check it out over at FanDuel.com. Join today. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Joe Marino, Locked On Bills, joined by Kevin Ostreicher, the host of Locked On Ravens. It's Kevin's turn to kind of pick my brain on anything Bills related you want to get into.
Yeah, and I think I want to start where you started, Joe, because obviously week 4, these are two different teams. And on the Baltimore side, we talked about the Ravens defense, but the Bills did not have multiple key contributors in that game who will obviously be looking to make an impact in this one. And I've been trying to, over on Locked On Ravens, say that, week 4, it's great. The Ravens dominated that game, and that's how it went. But the playoffs are going to be a whole different beast. So for Buffalo's defense, how different does this unit look with the guys that they were missing in week 4?
Well, I still think there's concerns about the Bills' defense, but I will say they're in a lot better position from a personnel perspective, particularly on the second level, where they were without their starters. They didn't have Terrell Bernard, their team captain, middle linebacker, and Matt Milano, and instead it's Balin Spector and Dorian Williams. Those are really not experienced players, both on rookie deals that haven't really proven anything, especially at that point in their career. And when they went 3 linebackers, Nicholas Moreau came onto the field, which they did about 28% of the time, not to mention Taron Johnson, who's 100% of this snap slot player, very good slot corner. That whole second level, your top 4 second level players were out, which obviously in a game against Baltimore with Lamar and Derrick Henry and the tight ends and the stress that they put on the second level, it'd be helpful to have those guys against Baltimore, not to mention Taylor Rapp, the Bills starting safety. After 16 plays, he was concussed, and you lean into Cole Bishop, a rookie out of Utah, in his 4th game after really missing all of the preseason, having to play 41 snaps in that game. Plus, I would say their defensive tackle rotation is quite different. And so I think those are meaningful things offensively. This was the before Amari Cooper version of the Bills offense, and only their 4th game together with Joe Brady as a full-time offensive coordinator, where Josh Allen has a brand new receiver core. I think everybody understands that. And it was still early in the season. Now, they poured it on those first 3 weeks, but they certainly met a tough foe in Baltimore. What was interesting about Baltimore, you mentioned all the the issues that they had stopping the pass earlier in the season. Well, somehow the Bills were the only team that couldn't throw on them, right? I mean, I still have a hard time reconciling that. That was like the one game they couldn't get anything going. I think the game script got away. It got into a true drop back passing game. There were some drops, the goofy trick play call that winds up resulting in a turnover. And I think the Bills, I actually went back and listened to my analysis today, my game reaction podcast, and I did an all 22 review. It didn't even sound like I was talking about the same team that I'm talking about today. So they've grown a lot, but obviously it's about who shows up on Sunday. And for the growth that I think has existed with the Bills defense, it's still a very, very challenging matchup for the Bills specifically. I think Baltimore's offense is challenging for anybody, but for the Bills who like to play light boxes, that live in nickel and dime personnel, and like their new defensive package that they're working on is an odd mirror. It's a 3-2-6. I mean, they just don't put a lot of big people in the box, and I think you kind of have to against Baltimore. So how do they evolve from there? We'll find out, but I think it is fair to say that there's quite a bit different on Buffalo's side as well.
One of the things I've seen, Joe, is with these top three teams, Chiefs, Bills, and Ravens in the AFC, it's almost like a triangle diagram of like the Bills match up great with the Chiefs, and then the Chiefs match up great with the Ravens, and then the Ravens match up better with the Bills. And like it seems like that is almost the diagram you have to look at. Now, that doesn't mean that, that's a win for every team that matches up better. There are things the Bills and the Ravens can do to win this game. But you mentioned Amari Cooper, and this has been one of my biggest mysteries across the whole league this season, because Amari Cooper gets traded to the Bills. And I think Amari's a good player. And I liked that move for Buffalo at the time. I thought it was great to go out there, get Josh a proven, established weapon. But the results for Amari haven't necessarily been there completely. And he's missed some games. It's taken some time for him to get acclimated. Has it just been he's not as good as expected? Is it taking him more time than anticipated to get with the playbook? Or there just other better receivers that are taking those snaps away? What's this Amari Cooper situation in Buffalo right now?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question, Kevin. And here's the reality is if your name's not Josh Allen or James Cook, there's nothing statistically impressive about your season in Buffalo with their offensive skill players. I mean, they have this everybody eats mentality, and it's really true. I mean, you got a bunch of guys that have between like 20 and 40 catches, like maybe 7 of them. They had 13 different guys catch a touchdown pass this year. That's not about any one player, and I think that's unlocked the best version of Josh Allen and this Bills offense. Like, they're a better offense because they don't have Stephon Diggs, and they don't have Gabe Davis as like these target hogs that took away from just doing the smart right thing with the football. And so I think that's where you kind of start, is acknowledging that nobody has that overly impressive production if you're not Cook or Josh Allen. I think here's the deal with Amari Cooper. He certainly made a lot of plays. He's just not a high volume piece of this offense. Like I said, nobody is. And what he does do, along with the presence of Keon Coleman, their rookie, big-bodied ex-receiver type guys, is it's dictated looks. Because you put these two big bodies on the perimeter, you get a lot of man coverage, you get a lot of one high middle of the field close, and I think that helps get the Bills offense into good looks to use the weapons that they're best using, which is their running backs, their tight ends, and their slot players. And so while maybe there's not an impressive statistical resume to show, it's the looks that it generates, that it forces, that allows the Bills to then play matchups that are more favorable with positions where they have better talent. So there's moments for Amari Cooper, and still does the contested catch stuff. I mean, obviously he played in Cleveland. Baltimore, you guys know who Amari Cooper is. So those moments still happen. They just don't happen at a high volume.
Right. And I think that it has been one of the best things to happen for this Bills offense, especially because, I mean, you have guys like Matt Collins who have made such a huge impact this season, and obviously Khalil Shakir, and there are weapons over there, the tight ends over there, Kincaid and Dawson Knox. It is, as we call it over here in Baltimore, pick your poison type offense. And I feel like in Buffalo, they employ a lot of those same things, but it's just like, it doesn't have to be a Stephon Diggs 13 target, 10 reception game, and then Gabe Davis has 1 catch for 13 yards and that's it.
Yeah, and Kevin, I mean, Ball, what do defensive coaches want to do? They want to say, let's take away the thing that you do best and force you to play another way. Well, go ahead. What do you want to take away? It doesn't matter. And then that was a big conversation I had with Denver last week, the Buffalo game. And it's like, okay, Patrick Surtain's like the best corner in the NFL. He is, but he's mitigated in a game like this because what does he do? He takes away Cooper. Okay. That's exactly what they'd like you to do with him. So I think it's really smart of both Baltimore and Buffalo. And I think there's some other teams out there that are like this, that are not making it about any one skill player in the passing game. And it's like this all above the above approach. So it's like, go ahead, the Bills did this happen to them last year against Kansas City. They show up with Stephon Diggs, and everybody knows that he's got to get his production or else he's going to be pissed off. And it's like, okay, L'Jarius Sneed takes away Stephon Diggs. Well, now what do you do? Well, you're screwed because you don't have anything else established. And so it's like the exact opposite where it's about it's about everybody. It's about Josh Allen. It's about Lamar Jackson and how they facilitate things and forcing different coverage looks.
And I feel like that's the way the NFL is almost shifting in some way, shapes, or forms, where obviously it's great to have your Justin Jeffersons or Jamar Chases or whatnot. But again, like in Cincinnati, you see T. Higgins go out and teams are like, okay, well, this is easy. We're just going to shut down Jamar Chase. And then, who's going to be there? Who else is going to be there to beat you? So right. I think it's a strategy the Ravens have, the Bills have, and that's why these two teams are facing off in the divisional round. But continuing with offense, I think we're on the same wavelength with our questions, because you asked about Lamar Jackson and, how do you slow down this offense? Well, this Bills offense is super high powered in its own right. Now, I've loved watching Josh evolve over the course of his career and the year that he's had. It's been undeniably great. But if there were ways to slow down Josh, how would you kind of lay out an opposing defensive game plan to maybe say, this is how you're going to not stop Josh? I don't think you can stop him, but how can you slow him down?
Well, it's a good question. I think you try to invite throws down the field. I think that's probably helpful. The Bills were great throwing the ball down the field against Denver. They hadn't really been all season long, kind of a bottom tier vertical passing offense. And Josh likes to throw deep. It was like kind of hard to reconcile the amount of times that he throws deep versus the success rate. It wasn't very strong, but he still does it. So maybe you kind of invite some of those looks. I think you have to be mindful with how you rush Josh. Obviously, he's pretty lethal when he gets outside the pocket to his right. So how do you prevent that? And Denver was very careful with how they rushed Josh, and they certainly try to do their cage rush, which is good. I think you need to have some elements of a cage rush, but sometimes when you cage rush, you're not really putting yourself in a position to go get the quarterback. Like at some point, you can try to cage him in and then just lose that way, or you can sell out and maybe try to get a negative play. You're probably still going to lose, but how do you get the negative play? You're not going to get the negative play by standing there and playing peekaboo with Josh Allen. He's going to stand there and make a throw like he did to Ty Johnson for a touchdown on 4th and 1. So I think you have to mix up your looks. That's really what it comes down to. How do you get him off rhythm? How do you get him uncomfortable with where the rush is coming? And how do you maybe invite some throws that are low percentage that he's willing to take from time to time? And obviously, I think there's an element to stopping the run. It's not Derrick Henry, but the Bills run the ball pretty well. In fact, I think their EPA per rush is higher than Baltimore's, which very, very surprising. I think this is 2 and 3 when it comes to EPA per rush. Now, it's different. It looks a lot different, but that's an important part of what has allowed this offense to be very, very balanced. And so those elements exist, and if you can do it, then that's great. But sometimes, you know how it is with Lamar. Sometimes it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter if they're going to be on a heater and make the types of plays that they're capable of making.
Yeah, and I think that Von Miller went on the Let's Go podcast, and he had a lot of comments about, he was asked, how do you defend Lamar? Like, what do you do when you're trying to play against a player like that? And he said, you don't want to really be too conservative, but don't want to be too aggressive either. And, cage rushing those guys and do it at every play, it's not effective. Right. You have to have some elements of it, but if you're trying to cage the guy in, it's not always going to work. And like you said, Joe, it's not your best bet for getting to the quarterback each and every play. So Lamar, Josh Allen, these guys are going to make plays. Yeah. They're going to get a couple spectacular plays each, but as Vaughn said, you have to know where the chipper is. You got to know where he is at all times. It's obviously gap discipline when you're talking about some of the read options and option looks that these teams can give you. So 2 high-powered offenses and 2 defenses are definitely going to have to step up in this one.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. We're going to talk about the keys to victory for both sides on the other side of it, folks. Be sure to stick with us. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions that maybe you forgot about or you were paying for twice? That happens. Don't let it happen to you. Rocket Money can help you with that. It'll make it easy to track down all of that. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings it all together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. And look, Rocket Money has over 5 million users. It's saved over a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when you use all of the app's premium features. I love the goals feature. It allows you to automatically set aside money for your future. There's no more stressing and worrying about budgeting every single month. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions. Reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Crossover Thursday is presented by Prize Picks. Download the app, use code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. I'm Joe Marino, host of Locked On Bills, joined by Kevin Ostreicher, host of Locked On Ravens, getting you ready for the divisional round Sunday night game between the Bills, Ravens, Highmark Stadium. Winner goes to the AFC Championship game. It is one win away from the Super Bowl. Kevin, if Baltimore is going to go into Highmark Stadium and get this win, what are the keys to victory?
I think one, being able to convert at a high level for the Ravens. This has been a team that when you look at their conversion rates, and this has been a storyline throughout the entire season for them, they're one of the best third down offenses in the league and the best red zone offense. They converted nearly 75% of their red zone opportunities when it comes down to that. So in games like this, and I expect this one to be close, probably a little more high scoring than the Pittsburgh game. And, obviously both the Ravens and Bills were able to put it to the Steelers and Broncos defenses, respectively. I just feel like red zone opportunities are going to be so huge. And that, honestly, the defensive side of the ball too. The Ravens on the defensive side of the ball, red zone wise, they've been okay. They're 12th. And when you look at Buffalo's red zone percentage on offense, they're right behind Baltimore, the number 2. So these are two high-powered red zone offenses, and it might just come down to which team is able to tighten up inside the 20 and force the opposing offense to kick field goals. With 2 field goal kickers I know, Joe, who have had some up and downs this season. Justin Tucker, luckily for Baltimore side of things, has turned it around since the bye week, but obviously it was a very rocky stretch for him before. So if it comes down to a final kick, whichever fan base it is, I'm sure it's going to be sweating thinking about what's going to happen here because of all the volatility we've seen from both those guys this year. Secondly, the Ravens have had an issue with penalties all season. It's no secret. They've ranked in the bottom 5, bottom 2, worst in the league, and a lot of that. And obviously, it's kind of forced the Baltimore fan base to look at who's going to be reffing each game and seeing tendencies. And I know the crew coming to Buffalo, I think offensive holding is the most called penalty of that crew. And it's just going to depend on execution, where the Ravens have had multiple times. We talked about stopping the run for Buffalo and Derrick Henry. The Ravens will get an 8-yard run, and then they'll be holding on an offensive lineman, and instead of 2nd and 2, you're in 1st and 20, and that just kills your drives. And the Ravens have lost multiple games this season that way. They've been better recently, but it's still not perfect. And then finally, I just think if I'm given like a key player in this game, Brandon Stephens is one that I think is going to be a huge matchup for Buffalo in terms of, we talked about guys like Amari Cooper, Khalil Shakir, Matt Collins. The Ravens have a lot of great players on that secondary, Marlon Humphrey, Nate Wiggins, and obviously Kyle Hamilton. But Brandon Stephens, his weakness is he doesn't turn his head around for the ball. And if you're a receiver, especially if the Ravens do invite Josh Allen to throw that ball deep and they're able to convert on some of those deep shots, if a receiver shows late hands, obviously as a receiver, you're looking for cues to turn your head around for the ball. And if Brandon Stephens doesn't get that, they're going to let up a lot of deep completion. So I think limiting the deep passing game and forcing turnovers. This could come down to just a turnover battle. Who ends up getting more turnovers? Who ends up holding the ball last? If whichever team makes the least mistakes goes on to the AFC Championship game, that wouldn't shock me whatsoever.
Yeah, it's funny how often games are lost more than they are won, especially in the postseason. I will say this, man. You mentioned the kickers. If Lamar Jackson versus Josh Allen for a date in the AFC Championship game comes down to Tyler Bass and Justin Tucker, something has gone wrong. Like, nobody wants that. That is not why a single person is turning on this game, and they're not turning it on to watch referees either. So let's keep the kickers and the refs out of this thing, because it's annoying. We want the players to decide what's going on. Kevin, it's interesting you start with red zone because I also start with red zone, and you mentioned 1 and 2, Ravens 1, Bills 2 in red zone touchdown percentage. Ravens defense is 12th. I think the Bills are 16th in red zone defense. And I think that's going to be really, really critical, particularly for the Bills on defense. And I want to go back to the last 4 matchups. The 2024 week 4 win, the Ravens 4 for 4 scoring touchdowns in the red zone. Go back to the 2022 game. The Bills win that one. Baltimore goes 2 for 4. Lamar has a red zone turnover. Go back to the 2020 playoff win. The Ravens go 0 for 3 in the red zone. There's a big red zone turnover. The Taron Johnson pick 6. Go back to the 2019 win that Ravens had over Buffalo. They go 2 for 3 in the red zone. There's been a direct correlation between the team that wins. They're 2 and 2 over the last 4. The team that's better in the red zone wins these games. You need touchdowns, not field goals when you're on offense. You need field goals, not touchdowns when you're on defense. I think that's critical, and it's interesting that we both went there first. Number 2 is find ways to get the Ravens offense out of rhythm. I don't have that answer, man. Like you talk about getting quick pressure. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. Can Ed Oliver win quick? Can you have some A-gap blitzes that create some confusion and you have a breakthrough and you got a free runner at Lamar or Derrick Henry? However you can get them out of rhythm, it's probably some of that. It's probably an all of the above approach, right? It's not like, hey, do this every single play. I think it's do lots of things at the right times. And I think that's going to be important. What can you do to get them out of rhythm? Because if you don't, dude, you've watched the Ravens. We've all watched the Ravens. It's like, how do you deal with it? Yeah. So I think it's an all of the above approach, and whatever it is, get them out of rhythm. And then number 3, another very similar talking point. I think for the Bills, it's about working matchups on offense. And I look at 2 in particular. Brandon Stevens, I think everybody knows. Like, that's the player you go after for Baltimore. And so if you have chances with Cooper or Coleman or Hollins, take them. I think not only is there a ball skills issue with Brandon Stevens, who's still kind of new to playing corner, if I'm not mistaken, at SMU. Yes. He's like a converted player. But, a guy that doesn't necessarily – there's going to be size advantages that the Bills can have there as well. And I think there's that other linebacker spot as well where it's Roquan and then it's like Malik Harrison, Chris Gordon. Yep. Right, so they've kind of moved away. The Trenton Simpson thing is not working for now. How do you take some chances there? I mean, the Ravens – have given up the fourth most receiving yards to running backs this year, the 9th most yards to tight end. So how do you get your guys in positions to take advantage of maybe some areas that Baltimore's had some vulnerability on defense? So it's winning red zone, find ways to get Baltimore out of rhythm offensively, and then what matchups can you attack that's going to keep your offense moving and scoring points?
And these are 2 very high-powered teams. And I think that when you talk about each particular matchup, there are ways that I feel like both teams match up well with each other, but I think it's going to be which team exploits the weaknesses better and say, we're just going to go to this over and over and over. Because, for example, the Ravens against the Steelers, one, didn't get up for the game. I expect Buffalo to be much more competitive than Pittsburgh was.
Sure.
Much more. But I think that the Ravens, there was a lot of conversation about, okay, they barely ran in the AFC Championship game. You need to lean into your strength. They ran 50 times because it was working. They exploited that Steelers weakness and they never let it go the entire game. So I think that for me, if the Ravens or Bills do that and they, don't get too cute, you stick to what you stick to who you are, that could be the difference in a win or loss.
Well, we will find out soon enough. Sunday night, the build-up still continuing. Obviously, if you're looking for coverage on either side, Locked On Ravens, Locked On Bills, before and after, you want to get the perspective on both sides of the equation. Kevin and I have you covered here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Here's one thing I think we can agree on, Kevin. The winner of this game, don't let Kansas City go. No more Chiefs.
No. Get the Chiefs out. Get the Chiefs out of here.
Get the Chiefs out so we can unite over that between Buffalo and Baltimore. All right, folks, this has been a blast. Kevin, thanks so much for being awesome and having a good conversation here. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. Again, more coverage all week long. Locked On Ravens, Locked On Bills. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.